I'm Chef Joseph Yoon, Edible Insect Ambassador at Brooklyn Bugs, and we work to raise awareness and appreciation for edible insects. But I started as an adult as a small business entrepreneur working in artist management for musicians. And about a dozen years after, I started feeling a little burnt out, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to start hosting some pop-ups. It's not fear factor, dare you to eat this insect, but rather, how can we address food security and sustainability, workforce activations, environmentalism? So providing the information and also the educational component so that we can have children exposed to insects as food, not as a pest, something disgusting or something that is not food. And I love to encourage that every single person has the power to be a change maker.
So hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Fugitive Chefs podcast. This week we have Chef Joseph Yoon. Chef Yoon's story is going to be something I think in the past we've never had somebody from this angle of food business in general, the whole food system. And for me, this episode is super exciting because I think we're going to see a side of what chefs can contribute to the food system, or questions like where do we find the source of food in the continuously depleting resources. And I think today Chef Joseph is going to help us look at some of these answers. Yeah, without further ado, I would like Chef Joseph to introduce himself. What do you do, Joseph? Where do you come from? What is Brooklyn Bugs?
Greetings. Thank you so much, Furqan. Very nice to be on your podcast. And I'm Chef Joseph Yoon, Edible Insect Ambassador at Brooklyn Bugs. And we work to raise awareness and appreciation for edible insects, sharing in its delicious potential, but also exploring the innovations of insect agriculture and its impact on global food systems and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've been incredibly fortunate to have traveled over 500 days since our founding in 2017, primarily funded by universities. And it's been just incredible to be at this juncture, to be sharing both as a chef, as an advocate, as a insatiably curious person to continue learning and share what I learn. And I'm so thankful to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. Insect agriculture, UN. There's so many terms that I think normally, like when I speak to chefs who still are in restaurants, at the core of when somebody says, "Oh, I'm a chef," you actually in your head already make an image. Okay, that's somebody who works in restaurants or somebody who serves food. So the food service industry. So I think the people hearing this are not expecting this kind of vocabulary. So before getting into what you do currently, which we've got a little glimpse on, which is great to catch upon this attention of people listening to this. How did you get into this? What is your first contact with food? Why food industry? What careers did you consider, or was it your first choice to get into food industry?
I feel incredibly fortunate that food has been an incredibly important part of my life because of my family. And I feel fortunate because not everyone has that relationship. And a mom and a grandmother and aunts who put so much care, not just in the food that they prepared, but in how they shared their food and in the service to the community and church for them. And for me to be a witness and just see their great joy, that for our family dinners and celebrations, everyone would sit down and we would all start eating the delicious food, and they would still be in the kitchen preparing the food hot, making it crispy, laughing, eating while standing up so everyone else can enjoy the food. And to be exposed to that sort of care and sharing and love and joy of service, I think left a really big imprint in my life. And so I always had a very close connection to food, but I started as an adult, as a small business entrepreneur working in artist management for musicians. And I loved cooking during that time. And I would throw these big parties at my house, but it was not my profession. And about a dozen years after running my artist management company, I started feeling a little burnt out and a little tired, and I just wanted to do something that I loved. And when I thought about that, I was like, okay, I'm just going to start hosting some pop ups. And this was back in 2011 when nobody knew what a pop up really was. So I was
Mm-hmm.
explaining to some of the bars that I was going to, hey, I would love to come, bring all the food, and heat it up and serve food for the night, and we'll be gone like we were never even here tomorrow, except for the maybe the beautiful lingering aromas of our food the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
And so that change did not push me to quit music industry and go into food
Mm-hmm.
until I put in my time. I hosted more and more pop-ups as really a passion project, is something that I just need to find this joy. And as I continue to do that, I began winning over a lot of different clients. And as that happened, I began transitioning from working in artist management into the food and hospitality. I started working with other chefs. I started getting invited to different sort of food festivals to share my food. And I slowly began transitioning from music to food. And because I had a really good business acumen from working in artist management and being a small business owner, I was able to very successfully contact and negotiate my fees and explain to the one percenters and celebrities that were reaching out to me to cook for them in New York City why it cost what it costed to hire me to come do their private events. And so, in really short time, I just recognized the need to start a business. And so, I think that it was a very natural evolution, taking the skill sets that I learned as a business owner, my love of cooking, and really being able to translate that and make that my full focus, and committing all my time and energy to food and hospitality shortly after.
Mm-hmm. But that's super interesting because normally the usual type of guests we have on this podcast are people who are chefs and they leave the industry. So that's the first job they do, being chefs, and then they transition to something else. Whereas in your case, you started with something completely different. Somebody would think that's not even relatable with the food industry, and nothing of that would be applicable, into this into the next step of in your career. But it's super interesting how the things you learned, and also the I think I would say your business aspect of things, of like knowing where to compromise and knowing where not to compromise, knowing what you're worth. I think that's one skill also, like many chefs I feel lack, because you get into an industry which is very intense, and then you get used to, also it's an industry which comes through a lot of people being there in your roles before you. So if they've accepted or if they've done it, you better do it as well. I had it difficult and you should have it tough as well. So I think with somebody from the outside, I would say stepping into it, I think most contribution to in any industry, I think, is made by multidisciplinary minds. And I think that's where you come in, because you came in with a mindset where you do not, for you, there's no baseline. So you set the baseline where you want it to be. So I think that's super interesting. I mean, you're mentioning some of these lessons, but I can only imagine of how many things you would have come up to do just because that's the way you think makes the most sense for you, and not just because that's how it's been. So super interesting. I would like to also ask you if while being so close with restaurants, approaching restaurants, asking them to let you do a pop-up, did it never occur to you that, what if I just join a restaurant if that's my full-time job of being inside a kitchen? Like, what held you back, or was it an idea which didn't work out? What's behind there?
Yeah, so I think that every chef, no matter what role you have as a chef in catering, as a private chef, personal chef, I think there's always a dream of owning a restaurant one day if you're a chef and you're really serious about it. I started cooking in my 30s. And so I thought maybe I should go to culinary school. Maybe I should try staging and learning more. And what I realized is because of my work conscientiousness and because I was willing to learn and work really hard, I started working for different chefs who I befriended and just sponging. I'm like, I will do anything. You want me to chop? Fine. Need someone to wash dishes while we're getting ready? Fine. You need the prep? Fine. And I just like kept my head down and did as much learning as I could. And so I felt like I'm learning a lot while also gaining my client base. And I found that I was able to make a living and also not work the incredibly strenuous hours required to climb up the chef ladder at a restaurant and also to suffer really what is really difficult wages that you have to climb up also at a restaurant. And what I realize is like, wow, as a small business owner, entrepreneur, working as a private chef, I was making significantly more money than people who had cooked 10, maybe even 15 years in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was obviously there's going to be pushback from chefs who see that. And also chefs are like, oh, you didn't go to school, you didn't work your way up. I think a really big thing for me, at first, I had a little bit more of an ego. And so I'd be a little protective and a little bulldogish. But because as I entered my 40s and I worked very hard to remove that burden, the yoke of the ego and having to prove myself and that I'm better than you or something. And it allowed for me to be very calm and to actually work with the chefs. And, for the chefs that were like, how do you ask for money? I have a difficult time asking for like $20. And so, how could I better ask for $5,000, $10,000 or this money? And so I'm happy to be a community builder and communicate and help other people when I can. And I think with that spirit, which again really stems from my mom and the family that I've been able to experience, I think that a lot of chefs also seeing my willingness to do that were willing to help me along my journey in how to be a better chef as well.
Wow, that's yeah. Again, another thing that you said over here is like, yeah, what I take away from what you've said right now is that, yeah, just knowing what you want and defining where you want to get. And I think that clarity is what I think the initial hurdles you had, which is, I mean, completely normal. Stepping into a business where things are done the way they're done. People usually go to school, or I mean, either you go to school or you grow up the ladder. And for you to go in and demand that, and demand, say, what I'm putting on the table, the experience I'm creating over here is something unique. You run a restaurant every day. I'm just wanting one day of that restaurant and making a special experience. And there are people willing to pay for it. So you have a product market fit, you have an idea which works, and then still having to, prove not to yourself, but to the people around you that what you're doing actually makes sense is just because, I mean, every industry needs, or every sort of business needs somebody to prove otherwise. Like, okay, this is possible, that you can jump in and provide something, or like what is happening right now, not just in the States, but all over Europe, every city. Now you have supper clubs, you have pop-up restaurants, you have dark kitchens, you have so many concepts coming in, which were all once questioned. And then today it's normal because, yeah, somebody said, you know what, I'm going to try this and fail at it, or prove you wrong. And I think that's also one clarity I think a lot of chefs miss, of just thinking that things don't have to be the way they are. You can always change them. I think what I've seen in the past years, or like when I used to work in restaurants, and the way I think now, the way I used to think before, I feel what also leaves very little room is the kind of life a chef usually has, because it's like 16 hours shift, you're sleeping, you're making any time for social involvement you can, paying bills, answering all your emotional needs that you need to do. And then that leaves very less room to question. So what's easy is to just, keep going and keep spinning the wheel of the hamster. And that's the easier way. So I think also what you highlight for those listening over here, who are people maybe who are in the restaurant industry, also need to understand that just the way we have defined the industry to be, we might be losing on a lot of talent which doesn't want to sign up to that system or doesn't want to sign up to that space scale. So that's what happened in your case. In your case, it worked out well. I mean, what you do today is something very unique. It fills a space in the industry, which is very important. And that is a result of you deciding to not having gone into restaurants. I can only imagine what would have happened if you, say, spent 10 years into restaurants and maybe still working in that ladder. So that's for me a key takeaway. But tell us about your initial years of those pop-up, the meals, the lunches, dinners, these events you were doing. What kind of food are you serving there? What are people expecting in an event like that?
Yeah, so this is like a really another life ago almost for me,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
Brooklyn Bugs has like been like the big thing. And so it's almost like a beautiful walk down nostalgia for Khan. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
asking. And the pop-ups required a lot of grit, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
work. And I think that part of that just willingness to do anything, because for these pop-ups, before pop-ups were really a thing, I would bring a table, I bring an oven, a convection oven or stovetops. I would bring all the plating because I would regularly go into bars where they didn't serve food, and we would have to do all the promotion along with the bar because they wanted to do well as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would often just talk to the bar and work around special themes and events. So if it's Valentine's, a Valentine's thing. If it's a Super Bowl party. We did during the elections, we did like food from all over America. And we would do fundraisers. We would focus on like Korean food, Southwestern food. And we would try to come up with a theme. And it constantly pushed me to learn new foods and practice and make sure that, it's not just like, oh, let me make this thing my Korean food that I know really well or something. And it was my curiosity and my desire to learn and continue pushing. And so we would just very happily work with these different bars and eventually restaurants. But it wasn't really until people started asking me to be their private chef or to cater events where I was really able to start looking at making this my full time position. Because the pop ups, especially in 2011, they were very sparse. And a lot of times, even in trying to tell my friends, they'd be like, what's that? What do you mean you're going to have serve food at this bar that we hang out in? Like, what is that? What are you doing? And so it required like that explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was a really big lesson though, and something that I learned in the music industry, thankfully, is that it is never a good idea to rely on your friends and put that burden for the success of your company.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, I would love if my friends would join us and come to the events, but I'm not going to be angry if they don't come to the event. And I think that was like a really big part as well, is that, I just relied on the hustle, the promotion. And so it really taught me a lot. And it's a period of time that I'm really grateful for as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's still, I mean, I think it's more common now. I think back when you did it, it wasn't like people would have to be explained what exactly it is. But I think today people are still reinventing in that sector. And I think all the inputs you share about that part of even if you say it's a while ago, I think it's still super relevant because a lot of people I know who are chefs in restaurants are looking at like get outs of that industry or for their own multiple reasons. And I feel a lot of them depend on this kind of, even I think it's also can be a good testing ground for if somebody has a restaurant idea. I think pop-ups or like just hosting events or like being private chef people is a great place to just test the ideas you think would work, because I
Mm-hmm.
mean people in the end would answer those questions if it does work or not. So any advice if you have for people listening this who want to say get into that sort of a business, what would you say like key learnings you had from back then? If you had to start it again, what would you do different?
Well, I think that some of the chefs that I met back then that were trying to do this relied solely on their culinary skills. But I think that we all recognize in food and hospitality, the second word of that, hospitality, is how are you going to engage with the clients? How are you going to make them feel like comfortable, like you're a reliable business person? And as much time as I spent in cooking and focusing on the gastronomy and cooking side, I made sure that my business was buttoned up, that I could very comfortably relate to people and explain the costs very transparently without seeming like I'm marking it up or something. And so I think that that's something that I would really encourage is like make sure you remember that hospitality, get comfortable with how you're explaining the costs and really be very clear. And that I think was a really big takeaway that I was able to share with a lot of chefs because they're like, I don't know, like these people aren't willing to pay what I need to cover my costs and make a profit. And so I'd be like, well, pitch me. Let me hear you. And they'd be like, so it's 2000. I know it's a lot. It sounds like a lot, but I'm like, yeah, no. You have to learn how to share this with confidence in your ability and what you're delivering all the time of your learning and expertise to get to where you are. It's not just this food on the plate, but everything else. And so I think that's really the big thing is like to learn the business because I found that I was able to leapfrog over so many private chefs that were fundamentally technically better as a chef than I was. Maybe as a cook they were far better, but they didn't have the business, and so I was able to like win over more clients that way. And so I think that's something that you have to consider in starting a business and everything is you have the food, which is of paramount importance and food handling and all that as well. But then also the other side, which is the business and creating the confidence among your for your clients and really just the storytelling and like what you can relay in how you're going to share your food with everyone as well.
Well, that's a lot of lessons for somebody who wants to start it. I think all of them make sense. I think the one that stands out for me, of course, coming from the industry is just being confident. I think that's a big step of chefs just being being straightforward and upfront about this is what it is, and the way you tell the story and the way you explain yourself sets the ground for then getting into that sort of a negotiation or not even having to get into the negotiation because the person in the front understands that why what costs.
Yeah, I think that going back to like just learning and almost having the DNA of sharing and service from my mom. And I would see a lot of chefs, private chefs, and they would just kind of be like, leave me alone. My servers will serve the food. I would be like, anyone who wants to come back in the kitchen is welcome to come. Because we're in someone's house, right? It's not like we're in at a restaurant and we have that separation of the restaurant. Like we're in someone's house, and you think about house parties. Where do people congregate? Like 90% of parties, it's like in the kitchen. There's something, the hearth, the warmth, where the food is coming, and so I really opened it up. And obviously, if it's like really small and we have a lot where maybe we're plating 10 courses for like 50 people, maybe then we need a little more control in the kitchen or something. But for the most part we kept an open kitchen policy and really just thought about what's the fun for the clients, for them to experience the novelty of a private chef in their house, and they get to like kind of show off to their friends a little bit, right? Like, hey, we got a private chef, and and so like I try to be very mindful of all those things, and really just, and that's also like kind of like removing part of the ego of like, and really just kind of being with the people and making the kitchen and the whole experience just seem very welcoming as well.
Wow. And then, so Yummy Eats, that was Yummy Eats. And from Yummy Eats to Brooklyn Bugs, how does that happen? Like, how does that transition happen? Was it natural for you? How did you get into the world of insects? Do you have any memories of the first insect you tried? Was it something natural, something just trendy? How did you get there?
Actually, I do remember the first insect that I ever ate. And it was from and this is probably sorry, mom, but it was when I was in high school, and the tequila worm that was at the
Ah,
bottle,
okay,
right?
yeah.
And I don't really count that because that was more of a gimmick sort of
Yeah,
shtick or something. But
yeah,
I think when people would come back and they would be like, "Hey, I tried these crickets," and so I would try that. And then when I eventually traveled to Mexico, then I ate more like some of the ants and escamole. And I was always open to new food. I can't think of a single food that was prepared as food that I wasn't open and willing to try. And so that was like the first like exposure to insects, but I had never thought about cooking with them and making that be an evolution of what I was doing with my work as a private chef. Um, and then an artist asked if I would cook insects for an art project for her. And so I said yes, not knowing really anything about what that meant. But I was like, that sounds great. I'd love to work on your art project. And after saying yes, I go onto Google and I do some Google searching. And I see the FAO, the UN's Food and Agriculture
mm-hmm.
Organization, they have a report, Edible Insects Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security, that was published in 2013. So I'm starting to look through this this scientific journal essentially, but it reads really, for me, it was a very entertaining read, and it poses the question of how will we sustainably feed the world's growing population in 2050? And it was by far not suggesting that this is a silver bullet, that eating insects will be the silver bullet for this big question. But it talks about indeed how sustainable edible insects are. It talks about edible insects for animal feed and now for pet food. And it talked about providing livelihoods in micro livestock farming for people around the world that don't have other job opportunities, particularly rural women. And so it really addressed these incredible big pillars that eventually became my guiding North Star, and these incredibly inspirational and motivational pillars for me that didn't exist cooking really for a lot of one percenters. And so finding this great purpose of, okay, it's not fear factor, I dare you to eat this insect, but rather, how can we address food security and sustainability, workforce activations, environmentalism? And what I found to be really captivating and really so interesting with this is that it requires this cerebral, sort of intellectual, psychological quality when you think about how will we change the perceptions, these stigmas that people have in America around eating insects. And that question just continues to really really spark my curiosity. And so to find these multiple layers of the interdisciplinary nature of this, and that I was able to combine all the skill sets that I've accumulated as a business owner at Spectrum Music, my artist management company back in 2001, as a chef at Yummy Eats starting in 2011, as a creative, as an artist that playing music my entire life, and to find all these things culminating for me to be successful in becoming an edible insect ambassador at Brooklyn Bugs, so that it wasn't just about cooking insects, because we already have your former boss Renee Redzepi, who cooks insects at the highest level. We have Alex Atella, and we have all these genius chefs that were doing that. But I think what I found what was needed is someone who can work towards changing perceptions and work towards the advocacy of edible insects as the main idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of having it on my menu, which I started doing as a private chef, offering edible insects to some of my clients who are like, oh, that sounds like a novel, interesting food and it's related to sustainability. But I soon began realizing, okay, this requires a wholehearted commitment for me if I'm going to be successful in my mind. And that's why when I started Brooklyn Bugs, instead of just calling myself like an insect chef or something of that nature, I decided an edible insect ambassador, someone who can like work towards advocacy, someone who can be open to collaboration, share the knowledge I have, not be secretive like this is my secret recipe, and really try to build the community, connect the industry, the academia with the chefs, the gastronomy, and really be a part of building this larger framework and thinking about the solutions and the best way that we can move this matrix forward, both globally while also historically defining insect agriculture for humanity as well.
Mm-hmm. It's again, I mean, it's brilliant, ingenious how you found again another niche. Like this is like third time in your career where you find something which is a niche, and then again, also I think your focus on that niche is super specific. As you said, you could have just been an insect chef or something, say a more I wouldn't say superficial, but something which would have an impact, very economically headed, rather than something which is more for the better, like the bigger good, you know. So in that sense, I really love the way you define it, the insect ambassador. And as in this role right now as Brooklyn Bugs, what would you say if somebody has to understand what are the activities you do on a general basis? Like what is your, I think it's tough to say what's your day like, but what's your week like, more or less, because I believe there are a lot of different sort of interactions on how you are kind of representing this new, I mean, it's actually not new, and we'll get there, how insect eating is nothing new. It's not a trend that has just come up and we've, you know, come up with, oh wow, there is an insect eating trend. But like what kind of activities do you do during a week?
I love that every day and every week is actually quite different. And it allows for me to be nimble and think about the most impactful and engaging way that I can create these sort of the programming that I'm able to conduct. And there have been big chapters of what I did at Brooklyn Bugs. And so the first chapter was sharing this knowledge and finding who cares, who wants to listen, who cares about how I share my work with edible insects. And I was very fortunate that the media was very interested, and universities were also very interested. And I think that a big part was that I also removed myself. Like, again, it's like removing the ego to being like, hey, look at me, I'm doing this thing. But doing this in a matter of thought leadership and in the bigger picture and how we can engage and what problems we're addressing and how we're suggesting we can solve these problems. And so that was the route that we were taking for the first few years, from 2017 to 2020. And then COVID, the great equalizer, because no one was immune from COVID. And essentially, I got all my funding removed because I couldn't tour at the colleges anymore. And I went through a tremendous period where I was absolutely broke. I used all my savings, and I became broke in my 40s during COVID. And at that time, I was wondering whether, okay, do I need to go back to private chefing just to make money and survive? And so I did get one client temporarily to at least put some money in my pocket. But then what I realized is like, Joseph, just, you know that what you're doing is of great importance. And I had conviction and I believed in the purpose. And so what I did is I just went to the lab, my kitchen, and just started cooking nonstop. And what I decided was I've been an omnivore my whole life. During COVID, I decided, what if I became an insectivore, a bugatarian, and I stopped eating meat and seafood and ate vegetarian and insects? That's pretty challenging for someone who loves eating meat and seafood. And so that pushed me to learn how to make satiating dishes that met my cravings. And that was a tremendous period of learning for me. And so from that point on, pretty much I would say 99% of my events afterwards, I no longer serve meat or seafood with my insect food because I don't want any vegetarians to go like, oh, I can't eat that because it's cricket crusted fried chicken or black ants and shrimp. It's like, here's everything vegetarian plus insects. And so that was a really big evolution in my culinary point of view. And then when the world slowly started opening up again in 2021, and I got asked to give another lecture,
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was like, I was looking through my presentation decks and I was like, I just cannot give my old presentation anymore. We have to acknowledge what the students have experienced.
Right.
Like, I can't just go up there and be like, hey, we should all eat insects. Like, this is the science why, this is the food why. I was like, I have to address what we've all experienced. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little motivational speaking and then follow it up with edible insects. And she was like, wow, we could really use that, chef. And so that was a really big pivot because it came very naturally for me. And as I continued to tour after COVID, a lot of the questions were like, who the heck are you? Where did you come from? And so I started incorporating more and more about my personal story, and it really resonated. And so last year, I traveled over 150 days, primarily funded by universities. The year before, over 150 days. And it's just been incredible to find such support and validation from leading universities around the world. I've now shared my work on 6 continents. And it's just been really fascinating to be offered really a significant amount of money, where some colleges that I've worked with now, they would offer me the endowment for the big speaker of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time I was offered this really large sum of money to come and speak and cook food, I said no. They're like, why not? And I was like, I can't accept that type of money unless you're willing to consider additional programming. I cannot come into your school and parachute in, give a lecture, serve some food, say thank you, I'll see you later. I want to have way more lectures, master classes, maybe host a fundraiser for a nonprofit in the community that's food oriented, maybe a food kitchen. And I think it goes to really the importance and belief in the work that we're doing. And there were opportunities to probably monetize my visibility in the media and with various sort of opportunities to get into CPGs, consumer packaged goods, and where people were willing to consider these things. But I just kind of felt like I don't want to go traveling around selling a product. I want to go around talking about great ideas. And a lot of my time right now is very happily spent reading, researching, cooking in the kitchen, taking pictures, following up on emails, thinking about big planning and programming events, thinking about media strategies. And
No, great. I mean, the kind of things you've said, looking at your Instagram, looking at the website, I had some idea of what you could be doing potentially. I mean, I thought about education, thinking about, like, as you said, contributing advocacy towards food policy or the global goals of bigger agencies like FAO and FTA, UN, and people like that. But then, yeah, the kind of, I think in the position you are right now, after trying what works, what answers, what questions, what kind of market. Like the first question that you said, I think for me was super important, on who wants to listen to you, is really interested. Because I think, unfortunately, in today's society, in the modern society, is taboo. Like many topics which were normal before, and now they have become suddenly not something natural that comes to mind when you think of food. So they basically convert the mealworm into some kind of a flour, so that essentially any chef can use that flour and incorporate that. And also the people consuming that don't really essentially have in their head that it could be coming from insect source. So there's a lot of mimicking involved, and it's kind of killing the idea that you're eating insects. So how do you approach that topic? What do you think is the best narrative one should use?
I think that one of the most important things with this is actually more philosophical, and in showing the kindness, the respect, and also recognizing that each individual is a beautiful, amazing individual. Meaning, there is not one catch all. There's not like one concept or bug or type of food that will make everyone want to eat it. Because that's a very common question. Like, chef, what insect do you think will really be the one that will make the big adoption? Or what's like the one dish you think that will make everyone want to eat this? It's like, no, I think first we have to fundamentally start with the humanity, the human concept and respect that this is a very complex calculus. To think about, one, there are billions of people around the world, represented in over 80% of the world's nations, that eats insects. So one, just having that sort of basic decency not to make their food seem disgusting, right? Because we are unfamiliar with it. But then two, okay, so we do have this idea, okay, fine, but maybe that's just for poor people or underprivileged people, and removing these tropes and these negative concepts about how other people are eating and bring that dignity and respect. And so a great deal of the work that I try to do in my travels is to meet with indigenous groups and to meet with various people and amplify their long time knowledge. And not go to the Amazon and go, hey, I'm a New Yorker, let me give you all the answers. But rather ask questions and listen. Think about what problems that they're facing, and then be able to share that with my counterparts, and then think about and bring these case studies to universities. And so one is showing that humanity and bringing the dignity and respect to the very food and the concepts of food justice, food sovereignty, showing that kind of respect. And then two, I think this is more addressing the question that I think you had, is how do we make this food so that we'll actually be willing to accept it? And so to address that question, I think that it's very important whenever I travel, I will arrive much earlier and eat the local food. I'm not going to go and be like, hey, this is my cricket kimchi, let's eat it. First, I'll go, hey, let me eat your local food. Let me know what food you guys love to eat. And then let me think about, if they already eat insects, let me try eating that food. And then let me think about how I can bugify their classic dishes and take the classic dishes and think about how to integrate insects to reimagine it as something recognizable. So I spent 3 weeks in Quebec, and one of their big dishes, it was for Insects That Feed the World conference back in 2002, and one of their big dishes is poutine. And so this is like the French fries with the gravy and cheese curds. And so I was like, okay, this is signature Quebecois food. What about if we were to make cricket gravy and using a cricket stock to make the gravy, and then top it off with some grasshoppers to have this nice, beautiful texture to work with the fries and the cheese curds. And people they're like, oh my God, you're gonna make poutine like our food. And so when I go to places, that's a really big thing, is to think about what's a recognizable dish that people eat, and how can I integrate insects into that food instead of thinking, here's a skewer full of insects, here, try eating this, or here's a bowl full of crickets, like just try eating a spoon, just try it, like just, but instead, what can we do as chefs to make food that looks recognizable and that will entice them? It will literally compel them to try to eat this, because it's like, oh my gosh, that looks like food that I eat, but it has insects, and I know the virtues of the insects, and knowing that it can enhance the flavor profiles. And so depending on who it is that I'm working with as well, again, showing the respect to who it is that I'm speaking to. And so if it's food science students, then I'll talk about the food science. If it's chefs, I'll talk about flavor profiles, textures, and functionality. If it's environmentalists, I'll talk more about the environmental impact and the sustainability of it. If it's a general public, I think about the best way to how can I best communicate these big ideas. And so, this is a very, I think, long-winded answer for the approach, but I think it requires it, because it cannot just be it's sustainable, or so I try to know who I'm speaking to so I could best communicate with them. And so that's typically been my approach in how I'm going to try to introduce people to edible insects.
Yeah, I love the perfect answer, because I think what you've said in general is that it has to be adapted to the person you're talking to, the kind of people you're addressing this to, or the kind of people you want to get bugified. I think that's the word you used. I love the term. How can you bugify something? So in this whole journey of bugifying, or bugifying the world, what would you say are the major challenges?
Con, you had to ask that question. This could be the whole show. Unfortunately,
that's
sad but true. But I'll try my best to summarize. One is the acceptability, right? It's like that big, acceptance and changing perceptions, and that's really the big focus that we're working on. Two is a policy and legislation. If you're in America, the FDA has all this language about insects, as you could have 100 parts of insect parts in 100 grams of chocolate or whatever, and it's all as undesirable, but there's no regulatory framework for insects as food, right? So we need better policy and legislation, and to better inform people and build that confidence. There's more knowledge. There's a knowledge gap. Is it safe to eat? How are they farmed? All these questions on the safety and regulations is also a big part. Then we have the availability. If someone's interested, can they go to their grocery store? And we need to create the demand and the cart before the horse, the pricing of these things, because is there enough demand to have it at a really low cost? And then we have the chef question. And a lot of times people think, oh, so you're a very unique chef cooking with insects. I'm like, no, there are billions of people around the world that eat insects. And of those billions of people eating them, someone's got to be cooking them. So I know there must be millions of chefs around the world that are cooking with insects. Maybe just not with as big a mouth as I have. So it's the acceptability, gaining chefs to build the confidence for them to not think, oh, if I carry insects at my restaurant, I might lose. People might not want to come. So providing the information and also the educational component, so that we can have children exposed to insects as food, not as a pest, that something disgusting or something that is not food. And so these are just some of the big questions and challenges. I didn't want to harp on these issues for too long, because I think there's so much positivity and hope and optimism that I can share with what's going on in this industry. But I will bring up one thing, though. In going to Thailand, I thought it would be the mecca of eating insects. I see so many videos and street food and things in there, and it was very disheartening. I spoke with chefs, I spoke with professors, students, people on the street. And through all this oral interviews and stuff, most of the people were like, we don't really eat insects. That's for tourists and for poor people in the northern region. And what I'm finding is that sense of shame because of globalization. We now have Wi-Fi in the Amazon. We now have Wi-Fi in remote regions all around the world. And so they have access and they see the attitudes of other people towards insects. And so now we're seeing the younger generations feeling shame of this food source they've been eating for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And the parents, they're moving away from that to eat like all this processed, prepackaged food and everything. And so this poses like these big questions of like, how do we bring the dignity and respect so that people with this long history of eating insects can once again embrace it and not feel shame? Give them a seat at the table of leadership so that insect agriculture isn't just run by these multi-million-dollar Anglo-Western countries. What are the lessons that we can provide, and how can we create a more equitable industry system, ecosystem with insect agriculture as we're just really developing it into a multi-billion-dollar industry? Like, so these are all the complexities of what I'm trying to navigate with the help of a lot of different universities and institutions and thought leaders that have been very generous in engaging with me and hearing our problems and trying to be a part of really solving these issues that will require literally every single academic discipline. And so it's not just for chefs and for entomologists to like try to figure this out, but really every single academic discipline that I can think of can get involved with insect agriculture.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's a massive challenge, and I think it would be super interesting what we get to see out of this. The kind of advocacy you're doing, I think it's super important that, as you said, every part of society involves itself in it, and not just say chefs, because say chefs can open the door for it. I mean, that's how I tried. I've tried my first silkworm in the first restaurant I worked. Then in Noma I tried ants. I had some colleagues always from Latin America, and I tried those. They call it the Hormiga Colonna, the ant with the big
butt ants.
Big butt ants.
Yeah.
So yeah, like those. So like I tried a few of them thanks to being in the fine dining scene. So I think restaurants chefs at this position do have the privilege to, open those boundaries and see what else is out there, and that somehow trickles down. But I think it has to be accompanied with a very thoughtful process of the people involved into it. So it doesn't become a trend which just goes up and then everybody's eating it without knowing where it's coming from. Are we ready to produce that amount of insects? Is it going to be sustainable, the production of these insects in the future? So I think the job you're doing right now is very important. Mm-hmm. But I think the people listening to the podcast is mostly, I want to believe it's mostly chefs or people who are interested with the food side of things. Tell us about like all these travels that you've done. I think that's for me the most attractive part. In all these experiences, could you highlight some culture, some community, some tribe, some people you met where a certain insect is used, and then I would say if you could tell us the use of it?
One of the things that I really place a great emphasis on is the respect that I must show when I travel, and the general stereotype of the loud, braggadocious American, and you put in New Yorker on top of that, male. And so people have a certain expectation of this know-it-all New Yorker chef who's going to come and tell us like all this stuff. And so I just want to squash all those like preconceived notions that people may have built up and listen. And that's been a really big skill that I've had to learn, because you could probably tell I'm quite loquacious. I love to talk, and so I found it so important to listen. And when I was in Sarayaku in the Amazon in Ecuador, they are facing these cataclysmic flooding events that they would only experience maybe once every 50 or 100 years. Now they've had two in the past 5 years. And when I learn about these issues, it's like, what's happening? Is this human-made conditions? It's like, well, all the deforestation, and this is simplifying it tremendously, but with all the deforestation, there's the water is now not being soaked in the ground. It continues to flood, like come downhill, downstream, and just like flood entire regions. Their chakras are all ruined. And so these are very important narratives while I go down and try chantakuro, the big palm weevils, and I learn about their preparation and things. It's like, what stories am I learning and what is happening? And so I think that's also a very important thing. It's like when you travel and learning, and then not to go like, oh, well, what about doing this, and that? It's like, no, let me just listen. And what they would, the traditional way that they would get these chantakuros is that they would typically just put them on a skewer and and grill them, or like kind of barbecue them. And another one, the maito, which is like my favorite way to eat the chantakuro now. So far, it's been my favorite way. And we went on this massive mountain hike, and they were like, "Do you want to go on an easy, medium, or hard walk?" And I was going out with two of the younger, like really fit guys, and I was like, "Well," and I asked the dad, I was like, "Well, which one do you do?" He's like, "Oh, the hard one's easy for me." And I was like, "All right, I'll do the hard one." So we go up into the mountains, and it starts pouring rain. It's Amazon. It's the Amazon. It's a rainforest, and we had to find cover, and it's all muddy and crazy. And then finally, we find this palm tree. I'm like, oh wow, okay. And then they take their machete and they just like chop down this palm tree. I'm like, wow. Okay, and you see how wasteful like this is if you're gonna do it in like a big farm to produce palm oil. For them, this is their chakra, this is their land, this is what they do. And once they chop it down, then they let the chantakuros come, and then they harvest chantakuros. Their way is very regenerative and intentional. But I just see like, okay, they cut it down, and then they're taking out the palm heart. So you have this huge tree, and they cut down and you take out the palm heart, which is just like this tiny amount. And it's like, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, we have all those palm trees like much closer. Why did we come all the way up here? They're like, this is a very special one, and we want to, kind of give you the special one because you want to eat these chantakuros, and so we want to show you like the best get the best palm hearts that aren't available down by the village. So we hike back, and the mom Rosa, she prepares it, and the maito is like basically you take either banana leaves or palm leaves, and we cut up the palm hearts, put the chantakuro in there, the palm weevils, wrap it up, and throw it on charcoal, and you just let it cook. And the beauty of the chantakuro, they live in palm trees, so they're going to have this sweet sort of quality to it. If you think about coconuts and just like, it has this sweet quality to it. But then like the flavors of how that mixes with the unctuousness, they're very fatty as well. And how that all mixes on the charcoal with the palm hearts, and it was just really the most exquisite way that I ate it, and just like how all those flavors come together. And in Korean there's this word kibun. It's like the feeling, and the feeling of being there, walking up this tremendous mountain in the rain and coming down, harvesting the palm hearts, and then putting it on the grill. It was just really fantastic. Because of my relationship with the family, and they know that I'm a chef, so they're like, all right, what do you want to make something? And so I prepared 3 dishes with the chantakuros. I did one that was so I kind of like shaved some sticks and made a shish kebab skewers, and we did like the classic shish kebab with some vegetables. I tried doing a ceviche, but in the limited time, their skins are so thick that it didn't really permeate the chantakuro entirely. So you kind of had to dip it after you kind of chew it a little bit. So I think that needs a longer preparation time, or a different way for a successful ceviche with the chantakuros. And then we also did a plancha, just like kind of frying pan with aromatics, and and try that as well. So I just love that their willingness to invite me into the kitchen. And Rosa is a very, very dear. I stayed with her and her family. And what I found really amazing and so beautiful is that we would go on hikes together. And typically with Estranjero, it's like they're not like the indigenous Quechua women aren't going out and spending time with like a man alone, like out foraging for yucca with, like that. That'll you typically be with another male or in a group or something. But we really befriended one another, and we had so many laughs, like just kind of shared in the kitchen space. And Gerardo, her husband, and he's kind of like they really kind of adopted me into their family. And so it's just like really incredible, beautiful sort of experiences, learning how to cook and sharing food. And I was also the first Korean that they ever met, and the oldest sisters are going to school in the city, and so they got into like K-pop and K-drama. So they come home and they're so excited. So I was teaching the kids Korean, and like they were all. It was like really just like not missing out on these special experiences to allow yourself to just kind of immerse yourself with the people and like that. Those are really the big takeaways. Maybe even more than the experiences of eating insects with different people, but really the humanity and learning and showing that care and feeling like really embraced and welcome as a part of their family from these experiences.
No, it's really cool. I mean, the way you got to experience this, I feel the whole not just they're going up for the palm tree, but also like connecting with this community, connecting what their daily life is like. It's not like not putting them into bubble of like the people that you draw up in your head who would eat insects are also as normal as the ones who want to learn about K-pop. So they're if they can adopt it and they can teach us their ways, and also you being a storyteller to take the story forward to places maybe their voices can't get. To do this advocacy, I feel it's very essential. You get to see the whole journey and not just go on an insect tour or something guided by a few men from the village, but to get to experience this. I think before we wrap up, I had a few questions for you. Like the people listening over here, as I told you, Chef, before, are people who are possibly in restaurants, people who have left restaurants for other careers. What would you like to share with them in terms of, for somebody who wants to make a transition like yours, on like you had an idea, you saw that report from FAO, and you jumped upon that opportunity to delve deeper into it, to find your purpose, or your what sort of way could you contribute to this purpose? What advice would you give to people? So it's not more about like how can you get better at, say, maybe insect advocacy, but more about having an idea like the one you had back then, or with the pop-up business, for example. There also you had an idea shifting from music. So for somebody who has an idea like that and wants to make the transition, what kind of advice would you give to people like that? And then if any other thing you want to share with people listening, this is your time.
Thank you so much, Furqan. And I really think that in attempting something new, and maybe you have this like great idea, a really big part for me is the intention. What's the intention of why you want to do something? And if you find this great connection to purpose, then that will give you the conviction to be fearless and to be able to take chances. And when you think about your intention, maybe you need to make a lot of money because you have debts. Maybe your intention is to do something altruistic for the world. I think we all have to be honest with what that intention is and cultivate the importance of what that means and how we can take our power and our chi, our energy, to really contributing back to the world. And to me, that's been among the most important things for me, is like, I've been so incredibly blessed to follow the passions in my life from music to food and now to global food systems, and to really believe in that work so much that, at least for me, it's not driven by the shorter sightedness of what will make the most money, but really being finding that purpose. And so that's what I would encourage in attempting new things or trying things out, is like really think about what your intention is, find your purpose in life, and really do it with like great kindness. And yeah, think about how that will impact people around you.
Yeah, such a beautiful thought to wrap up, I think. Yeah, finding your purpose. And I think even better if the purpose is one like yours, which is solving the bigger problems out there, at least making an attempt to contribute. I wouldn't say fix. I think the system still is working, but yeah, attempting to contribute to it to make it better. I think that's a great thought. So yeah, thank you so much, Joseph, for your time. It's been an utmost pleasure. I do not think I'll again have any insect advocate, a chef turned insect advocate, in this podcast. So it's an honor to have you. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Furqan. The honor is mine. And yeah, bon appetit.